The morning sun was just starting to warm the streets of Millbrook when Officer Brandon Cole pulled up to Washington Family Market. The small grocery store had been serving the community for over 60 years, its faded blue awning and hand-painted signs showing the wear of decades. Inside, 73-year-old Theodore Washington was arranging fresh vegetables, the same routine he'd followed every morning since taking over from his father. Theodore had woken up early as always, arriving at the store by 6 in the morning to receive deliveries and prepare for another day. His granddaughter Ashley was helping him stock shelves before heading to her law firm downtown. The store wasn't fancy, but it was clean, well organized, and filled with everything the neighborhood needed. Local families had been shopping here for generations, and Theodore knew most of his customers by name. Officer Cole stepped out of his patrol car and looked around with obvious distaste. He'd been called here because someone reported suspicious activity at the store, though the call had been vague. As he walked toward the entrance, his radio crackled with routine updates from dispatch. The morning was quiet, and this seemed like an easy call to handle before his shift really got busy. The bell above the door chimed as Cole entered. Theodore looked up from behind the counter with a friendly smile, the same welcoming expression he gave every customer. "Good morning, officer. How can I help you today?" His voice was warm and respectful, though he couldn't help but wonder what had brought the police to his store. Cole didn't return the smile. He looked around the store with a critical eye, taking in the neatly arranged shelves and spotless floors. "I'm here about a complaint. Someone said there might be some problems with how you're running this place." His tone was cold and official, immediately putting Theodore on edge. "I'm not sure what you mean," Theodore replied carefully. "We've been running this store for many years without any problems. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" He kept his voice calm and polite, though his heart was starting to beat faster. After decades of experience, he knew when a situation might turn difficult. Cole pulled out a small notebook and started walking around the store. "Let me see your business license, food handling permits, and fire safety certificates." His demand was sharp and immediate. With no explanation of why these documents were suddenly needed, Theodore nodded and moved toward the small office behind the counter. "Of course, I keep all our paperwork in order. Let me just get them for you." He had always been meticulous about maintaining proper documentation, knowing that any small issue could be blown out of proportion. But as Theodore searched through his filing cabinet, Cole grew increasingly impatient. "What's taking so long? These should be easy to find if you're really running a legitimate business." The officer's voice carried a suspicious tone that made Ashley look up from where she was stocking canned goods. "I'm looking for them right now," Theodore said, his hands shaking slightly as he went through the folders. The business license was in its usual place, but he was having trouble locating the most recent fire safety inspection certificate. "Here's our business license, and I know the other papers are here somewhere." Ashley walked over to help her grandfather. "Grandpa, didn't we put the fire certificate in the new folder last week?" She was a confident young woman who had just passed the bar exam and was working at a downtown law firm. She could sense the tension in the room and wanted to help resolve whatever was happening. Cole watched them search with growing irritation. "This is taking too long. If you can't produce proper documentation immediately, I have the authority to shut this place down." His threat hung in the air like a dark cloud, and several customers who had entered the store began to look uncomfortable. "Sir, we're trying to find everything you need," Ashley said politely. "We have all our permits in order. Sometimes the filing system gets a bit mixed up, but everything is here." She was trying to stay calm and professional, using the skills she'd learned in law school to de-escalate the situation. "I don't have time for excuses," Cole snapped. "Either you have the proper documentation or you don't. This store looks like it hasn't been properly inspected in years." He was now walking around pointing at imaginary problems, his attitude becoming more aggressive by the minute. Theodore finally found the fire safety certificate and handed it to the officer with relief. "Here it is, and here's our food handling permit too. Everything is current and up to date." The documents were clearly legitimate and recently renewed, but Cole barely glanced at them. These look suspicious to me, Cole said, though he couldn't point to any specific problems. And I'm seeing health code violations all over this place. He gestured vaguely at the perfectly clean store, his accusations becoming more outrageous. By the moment, Ashley stepped forward, her legal training kicking in. Officer, could you please specify what violations you're seeing? We take health and safety very seriously, and we'd like to address any legitimate concerns. Her voice was respectful but firm, and she was already thinking about documenting this encounter. Cole didn't appreciate being questioned, especially by a young woman who seemed too educated for his comfort. Don't tell me how to do my job. Shutting this store down immediately for safety violations and improper documentation. His decision seemed to come from nowhere, based on nothing more than his own prejudices. The few customers in the store watched in shock as Cole pulled out yellow tape and began blocking the entrance. Theodore stood frozen, unable to believe what was happening to his family's business. Officer, please, we've shown you all our permits. What safety violations are you talking about? The decision is final, Cole declared, clearly enjoying his authority. This establishment is closed until further notice. Anyone who interferes with this order will be arrested. He looked directly at Ashley as he said this. As if daring her to challenge him, Ashley quickly pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of everything. Her legal instincts told her this was completely improper, but she knew that challenging a police officer too aggressively could make the situation much worse. Grandpa, don't worry. We'll figure this out, she whispered. Theodore watched helplessly as decades of hard work were dismissed with a few pieces of tape. His regular customers gathered outside, confused and angry about what they were witnessing. Mrs. Patterson, who had shopped here for 30 years, kept asking what was wrong, but no one could give her a good answer. As Cole finished taping off the store, he turned to Theodore with a satisfied smirk. Maybe next time you'll keep your paperwork in better order. The threat in his voice was clear, and everyone present understood that this wasn't really about permits or safety violations. Ashley helped her grandfather gather his things, her mind already working on how to fight this obvious injustice. Theodore remained quiet and dignified, but his eyes showed the pain of seeing his life's work treated with such disrespect. Neither of them spoke about what they both knew, that this had nothing to do with permits and everything to do with prejudice. The yellow tape fluttered in the morning breeze as the Washington family walked away from their closed store while their loyal customers stood watching in disbelief. That evening, as Ashley helped her grandfather sort through old documents to prepare their response to the store closure, Theodore began sharing stories she had heard fragments of before, but never in full detail. The weight of the day's events seemed to unlock memories he had kept carefully stored away for decades. You know, Ashley, your great-great-grandfather Isaiah would never have imagined this day, Theodore said, settling into his favorite armchair with a photo album that had seen better days. The leather cover was worn smooth from handling, and some of the pages were yellowed with age. Ashley curled up on the couch beside him, setting aside her legal notes. She had always known their family had deep roots in Millbrook, but the full story had never been told in one sitting. Tell me about Isaiah, Grandpa. I want to understand how we got here. Theodore opened the album to a faded photograph of a tall, dignified man standing in front of what looked like a much smaller version of their current store. Isaiah Washington arrived in Millbrook in 1889, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a determination that could move mountains. He had been born into slavery in Georgia, but after freedom came, he heard about opportunities up north. The old man's voice took on the rhythm of a practiced storyteller, though Ashley had never heard these details before. Isaiah worked any job he could find. He swept floors, loaded wagons, helped build houses. People thought he was just another laborer passing through, but Isaiah was watching and learning every single day. Ashley studied the photograph more closely. Isaiah stood with perfect posture, his expression serious but not stern. Even in the old, faded image, there was something powerful about his presence. What was he watching for? He was studying how the town worked, Theodore explained. Who owned what, where the money flowed, which properties were valuable and which ones people ignored? Isaiah couldn't read when he first arrived, but he taught himself by studying newspapers and business documents that people threw away. Theodore turned to another page showing a simple wooden building with a hand-painted sign. This was the first Washington business. Isaiah saved every penny for 3 years to buy this little shop. People said he was crazy to spend his money on such a rundown place, but Isaiah had noticed something important. What did he notice? He saw that this corner was where 3 of the main streets came together. Every day, people walked past this spot going to work, going to market, going to church. Isaiah knew that someday this corner would be valuable. Theodore's eyes lit up as he spoke about his ancestors' intelligence. The next photograph showed Isaiah with a woman and 3 children in front of a slightly larger building. Isaiah married your great-great-grandmother Ruth, and they had 4 children. The business grew slowly, but Isaiah never stopped thinking about the future. While other people spent their money on fancy clothes or entertainment, Isaiah bought land. Ashley leaned forward, fascinated. What kind of land? Pieces that nobody else wanted, Theodore chuckled. Swampy areas outside town that people said would never be worth anything. Empty lots where old buildings had burned down. Isaiah would study the town's growth patterns and buy property where he thought people would eventually build. Theodore showed her a map that had been carefully preserved between the album pages. It was hand-drawn, with small X marks scattered across what appeared to be the Millbrook area. Isaiah marked every piece of property he owned. By 1910, he had quietly bought dozens of lots all around town. Did people know what he was doing? That was the brilliant part, Theodore said with obvious pride. Isaiah kept everything very quiet. He would have lawyers from the next town overhandle the paperwork. He paid in cash, so there were no loans to trace. As far as most people in Millbrook knew, he was just a hard-working shopkeeper. The album revealed more photographs spanning decades. Ashley saw images of her great-grandfather Robert, who had inherited both the business and Isaiah's strategic mind. Your great-grandfather Robert took over during the 1920s. Just before the Great Depression hit, Theodore continued, that must have been a terrible time for everyone. It was terrible for most people, but Robert saw it as an opportunity. When the stock market crashed in 1929, property values collapsed. Wealthy families who had owned land for generations suddenly needed cash desperately. Theodore's voice carried a note of satisfaction as he explained this part of the story. Ashley began to understand the scope of what her family had accomplished. So Robert bought more property during the Depression? Much more. He had been saving money and investing carefully for years, following Isaiah's example. When other people were losing everything, Robert was buying property at incredibly low prices. Some of the most valuable land in downtown Millbrook was purchased for less than it cost to buy a good horse. Theodore showed her documents from that era, carefully preserved in protective sleeves. Deed after deed showed Robert Washington purchasing prime real estate throughout the 1930s. The previous owners were often grateful just to get enough money to feed their families. They had no idea they were selling to a black man because Robert used the same strategy as his father. He kept everything secret? Completely secret. Robert understood that if people knew how much land the Washington family was accumulating, there would be problems. This was still a time when black families could face serious trouble for being too successful. Theodore's voice grew more serious. As he explained this reality, the photographs from the 1940s and 1950s showed the store expanding, and the family growing more prosperous, but always maintaining a modest appearance. Robert passed this wisdom on to me when I was young. He taught me that real power comes from ownership, not from showing off wealth. Ashley was beginning to understand why her grandfather had always seemed so calm and confident, even in difficult situations. So when you inherited everything ... I inherited not just the store, but dozens of properties all over Millbrook. Some of them have government buildings on them now. Others have become valuable commercial areas. Isaiah's swampy land outside town? That's where they built the new shopping center 15 years ago. Theodore pulled out a modern folder filled with current documents. Today, the Washington family owns the land under the police station, the courthouse, city hall, and about 60% of the commercial buildings downtown. We collect rent from businesses that have no idea who their actual landlord is. Ashley stared at the documents in amazement. Property after property was listed under various business names and trust accounts, all ultimately controlled by the Washington family. Grandpa, why didn't you ever tell me the full extent of this? Because the same rules still apply, Ashley. The moment people know how much we really own, everything changes. We become targets. People start looking for ways to take what we've built. Theodore's expression was serious but not worried. But after what happened today, After what happened. Today it might be time for some people to learn the truth, Theodore said quietly. Isaiah and Robert built this empire by being patient and invisible. But sometimes, when people push too hard, it becomes necessary to remind them who really holds the power. Ashley looked at her grandfather with new understanding. The quiet dignity he had shown during Officer Cole's harassment wasn't just good character, it was the confidence of someone who knew he could handle whatever came next. What do we do now, Grandpa? Theodore smiled and closed the album. Now we let them make their next move. And then we show them exactly what the Washington family is capable of. By the next morning, word about the Washington family market closure had spread through Millbrook like wildfire. Mrs. Linda Shun, who owned the Golden Dragon restaurant next door, was the first to notice the yellow tape still fluttering across the store entrance when she arrived to prep for lunch service. Linda had known Theodore for over 20 years, ever since she and her husband David had opened their small restaurant. Theodore had been one of their first customers, always polite and encouraging during those difficult early months when they weren't sure their business would survive. Now, seeing his store sealed off like a crime scene, she felt a burning anger in her chest. This is completely ridiculous, Linda muttered to herself as she unlocked her restaurant. She had watched Officer Cole's performance the day before from her kitchen window, and nothing about it had seemed legitimate. Theodore Washington was one of the most honest, hard-working people she knew. As the morning progressed, more business owners arrived to open their shops and discovered what had happened. Frank Rodriguez, who ran the hardware store across the street, came over to ask Linda what she had seen. Soon, a small group was gathered on the sidewalk, all talking at once about the injustice they had witnessed. "I've been shopping at Theodore's store for 35 years, said Betty Williams, an elderly woman who lived 2 blocks away. That man has never done anything wrong in his entire life. His store is cleaner than most restaurants I've been in. And what about his permits?" added James Foster, who owned the barbershop down the street. "I've seen the health inspector come through our whole block. Theodore always passes with flying colors. This whole thing smells like trouble." Linda felt a familiar determination building inside her, the same feeling she had experienced when her family first faced discrimination while trying to open their restaurant. She knew what it was like to be targeted unfairly, and she wasn't going to stand by and watch it happen to Theodore. "We need to do something about this," Linda announced to the group. "Theodore Washington has been a part of this community longer than most of us. He doesn't deserve this treatment." By noon, Linda had organized an impromptu meeting at the Golden Dragon. Word spread quickly through phone calls and social media posts. Business owners, regular customers of the store, and concerned community members began filing into the restaurant's back room. Ashley arrived with her grandfather, both of them touched by the unexpected show of support. Theodore had been quiet all morning, processing the previous day's events and thinking about his family's long history in Millbrook. Ashley could see that the community's reaction was affecting him deeply. "I can't believe how many people are here," Ashley whispered to Linda as more and more residents packed into the space. "Theodore has been helping people in this neighborhood for decades," Linda replied. "Now it's time for people to help him." The meeting began with Linda explaining what she had witnessed from her restaurant window. Person after person stood up to share their own stories about Theodore and his family's store. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of a business that had been a cornerstone of the community for generations. When my mother was sick last year, Theodore delivered groceries to our house every week, shared Maria Santos, a young mother with tears in her eyes. He never asked for extra money, even though I know gas was expensive. He just said that's what neighbors do for each other. During the ice storm 3 years ago, when the power was out for a week, Theodore opened his store every day and let people take what they needed, added Robert Kim, a local teacher. He told everyone to pay him back when they could. Some people never did, and he never complained. Old Mr. Peterson, who had lived in the neighborhood longer than almost anyone, struggled to his feet with the help of his walking cane. I remember when Theodore's father ran that store. The Washington family has been nothing but good for this community. What happened yesterday was wrong, and everybody in this room knows it. As the stories continued, Ashley began taking notes. Her legal training was telling her that these testimonials could be important if they needed to fight the closure in court. But more than that, she was learning things about her grandfather that he had never told her himself. Linda had been thinking about next steps while listening to everyone speak. "We need to make this public," she announced. "The whole city needs to know what really happened here. Theodore Washington is being targeted, and that's not acceptable." "What do you have in mind?" asked Ashley, looking up from her notes. "A peaceful protest," Linda said firmly. "Tomorrow morning, we gather in front of the store with signs and show everyone in Millbrook that this community stands with the Washington family." The room erupted in agreement. People immediately began volunteering to make signs, contact local news outlets, and spread the word through social media. The energy was electric, fueled by a combination of anger at the injustice and genuine love. For a man who had quietly served his community for decades, Theodore finally stood up to address the group. The room fell silent as everyone waited to hear what he had to say. "I don't know how to thank you all," he began, his voice slightly shaky with emotion. "My family has called Millbrook home for over 100 years, and days like this remind me why we stayed." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've seen good times and bad times in this community. I've watched children grow up, supported families through hard periods, and celebrated successes with all of you. What happened yesterday hurt, but seeing all of you here today reminds me that most people are good." Ashley watched her grandfather with admiration. Even in this difficult moment, he was finding ways to be gracious and positive. But she could also see something else in his eyes, a quiet strength, that suggested he wasn't planning to simply accept what had happened. "We appreciate your support more than you know," Theodore continued, "but I want everyone to understand something important. This isn't just about my store. If they can do this to me, they can do it to any of you. We need to stand together to make sure this kind of treatment stops." The meeting continued for another hour as people organized committees and planned specific actions. Linda took charge of coordinating the protest, while others volunteered to contact city council members and local media outlets. Ashley found herself appointed as the group's legal advisor, tasked with documenting everything and ensuring their actions stayed within the law. As people began filing out of the restaurant, many stopped to shake Theodore's hand or give him encouraging words. The elderly man who had seemed so defeated the day before was now surrounded by a community that clearly loved and respected him. "This is amazing, Grandpa," Ashley said as they walked home together. "I had no idea how many people cared about you in the store." Theodore smiled, but his expression was thoughtful. "Your great-great-grandfather Isaiah taught our family that real strength comes from being part of a community, not just from accumulating wealth. These people are showing me that lesson still holds true. So what do we do next?" "We let them have their protest and show their support," Theodore said quietly. "And then, if Officer Cole and his friends don't come to their senses, we remind them that the Washington family has been building power in this community for a very long time." Ashley could hear something new in her grandfather's voice, not anger, but a kind of quiet determination that suggested the story was far from over. Tomorrow's protest would be just the beginning. While the community was rallying around Theodore Washington, Investigative journalist Diana Torres was sitting in her small office at the Millbrook Daily Herald, digging into a story that had been bothering her for months. Diana had been covering local news for 8 years, and she had started noticing a troubling pattern in how certain businesses were being treated by the police department. The Washington Family Market closure was just the latest incident that didn't seem to add up. Diana pulled out a thick folder she had been building over the past year, filled with newspaper clippings, police reports, and her own handwritten notes. The pattern she was seeing made her stomach turn. "Let's see what we have here," Diana muttered to herself as she spread the documents across her desk. The first case dated back 3 years to Riverside Electronics, a small shop owned by Miguel Gutierrez and his son. According to the police report, Officer Brandon Cole had responded to a noise complaint and ended up closing the store for electrical code violations. Diana remembered that story because she had tried to follow up on it at the time. Miguel had insisted the electrical work was all up to code and had the certificates to prove it, but when Diana called the city inspector's office, she was told the matter was under review. The store never reopened, and the Gutierrez family eventually moved away from Millbrook. The second case involved Harmony Hair Salon, owned by sisters Janet and Carol Williams. Officer Cole had arrived during a busy Saturday afternoon claiming someone had reported sanitation issues. Within an hour, the salon was closed and the sisters were facing thousands of dollars in fines. Diana flipped through her notes from that incident, remembering how confused and upset the Williams sisters had been. "We've been running this salon for 15 years, Janet had told Diana during their interview. "We've never had a single health code violation. Our place is spotless, and all our licenses are current." That officer walked in looking for problems, not responding to any real complaint. The salon had eventually reopened after the sisters paid the fines and went through an expensive re-inspection process, but the financial strain had been enormous. Carol Williams had told Diana privately that they were considering selling the business because they couldn't afford another incident like that. Diana's research had uncovered 2 more similar cases. Golden Spoon Restaurant, owned by the Kim family, had been closed for food safety violations that the owners insisted were completely fabricated. The family had spent weeks and thousands of dollars proving their kitchen met all health standards, but the damage to their reputation had been severe. Most recently, there was Murphy's Auto Repair, owned by Kevin Murphy, a black mechanic who had built a solid reputation over 20 years in business. Officer Cole had arrived claiming someone reported environmental violations related to oil disposal. The shop was immediately shut down, even though Kevin had all the proper waste management contracts and documentation. Every single one of these cases has Officer Brandon Cole as the responding officer, Diana said aloud, highlighting his name in each report. "And every single business is owned by minorities or people of color." Diana picked up her phone and called the police department's public information office. She had learned over the years that getting straight answers from law enforcement required patience and persistence. "Hi, this is Diana Torres from the Herald. I'm working on a story about business inspections in the downtown area, and I was hoping to get some statistics on enforcement actions over the past few years." The desk sergeant on the other end sounded bored. "What kind of statistics are you looking for?" "I'd like to know how many businesses have been closed or cited for violations in the downtown district." Broken down by the responding officer, there was a long pause. "That's going to require a formal records request. You'll need to submit paperwork and wait for processing." Diana had expected this response. "How long does processing usually take?" "Could be several weeks, depending on the complexity of the request." After hanging up, Diana decided to try a different approach. She called the city clerk's office to request information about business license renewals and violations. Then she contacted the health department to ask about inspection records. Slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge. What Diana discovered made her even more concerned. While other officers in the department had written citations or responded to business-related complaints, the frequency and severity of Officer Cole's actions were completely out of line with his colleagues. In the past 3 years, Cole had been responsible for closing 6 minority-owned businesses, while all other officers combined had closed only 2 businesses total. Diana's phone rang as she was reviewing the numbers. Diana Torres, Miss Torres, this is Kevin Murphy. I heard you've been asking questions about business closures downtown. Diana recognized the name immediately. Mr. Murphy, yes, I remember your auto repair shop case. How can I help you? I was wondering if you've looked into Officer Cole's background at all. Because I did some checking after what happened to me, and there are some things you should know. Diana grabbed her notebook. What did you find? Well, for starters, Cole's uncle is Richard Cole, who serves on the city council. Richard's been very vocal about wanting to upgrade the downtown business district. I also found out that Brandon Cole used to work for a private security company that did business with some of the big development firms. This was new information that Diana hadn't uncovered in her research. Do you have any documentation of these connections? Some. I can email you what I found, but there's something else. I talked to Miguel Gutierrez after his store was closed. He told me that a few weeks before Officer Cole showed up, a man in an expensive suit had visited his shop asking if he was interested in selling. Miguel said no, and then suddenly there were all these code violations. Diana felt her journalist instincts kicking into high gear. Did any of the other business owners mention similar visits? That's what I'm trying to find out. I thought maybe you could help since you have connections in the community that I don't. After ending the call, Diana immediately began making more phone calls. She reached out to Janet Williams from the hair salon, the Kim family from the restaurant, and several other business owners who had faced harassment from Officer Cole. The pattern that emerged was even more disturbing than she had initially suspected. In 4 out of the 6 cases, business owners reported being approached by unidentified individuals, asking about selling their properties in the weeks before Officer Cole appeared with sudden violations. This isn't just harassment, Diana said to herself as she compiled her notes. This is a systematic campaign to force people out of their businesses. Diana's editor, Tom Bradley, knocked on her office door. How's that business closure story coming along? Tom, this is bigger than I thought. I think we're looking at a coordinated effort to push minority business owners out of downtown. Officer Cole appears to be just one part of a larger scheme. Tom sat down, his expression becoming serious. What kind of evidence do you have? Diana spread her research across the desk and walked Tom through everything she had discovered. The pattern of harassment, the family connections, the mysterious visitors asking about property sales, it all painted a picture of systematic discrimination. This is good work, Diana, but we need to be very careful. These are serious accusations against a police officer and potentially other city officials. We need more evidence before we publish anything. I know. I'm planning to interview more business owners and try to track down information about these property development connections. But Tom, the Washington family market closure happened yesterday. If this pattern continues, they're going to try to force Theodore Washington to sell his property too. Then you better work fast. If this story is as big as you think it is, people need to know the truth before more families get hurt. Diana spent the rest of the day making phone calls and scheduling interviews. She had uncovered what appeared to be a deliberate campaign of harassment and intimidation, but she needed more evidence to prove it. The Washington family deserved to know what they were really up against, and the community deserved to understand the larger forces at work in their neighborhood. As she organized her files for the next day's work, Diana couldn't help but think about how many other cities might have similar problems. If Officer Cole could get away with this kind of behavior for 3 years, how many other communities were facing the same systematic targeting of minority-owned businesses? 3 months before Officer Cole had walked into Washington Family Market, Mayor Victoria Henley was sitting in her private office reviewing architectural plans that could change the face of downtown Millbrook forever. The election was just 8 months away, and she needed a major development project to boost her chances of winning a second term. This could be exactly what we need, Victoria, said her campaign manager, Paul Davidson, as he spread the glossy presentation materials across her desk. The Meridian Development, Group is offering to completely transform downtown into a modern shopping and entertainment district. Mayor Henley studied the artist's renderings with interest. Where she currently saw small family businesses and older buildings, the plans showed sleek storefronts, upscale restaurants, and trendy boutiques. The projected property tax revenue increases were impressive, and the promise of new jobs would certainly appeal to voters. What's the timeline on something like this? She asked, already imagining the campaign ads she could create around bringing prosperity to Millbrook. That's the beauty of it, Paul replied. Meridian has the financing in place and contractors ready to start. They could break ground within 6 months of getting the necessary approvals and property acquisitions. The mayor looked more closely at the map showing which properties would need to be acquired. Most of downtown would be affected, including several blocks of long-established businesses. What about the current business owners? Are they willing to sell? Paul's expression became more serious. That's where we might face some challenges. Some of the older businesses have been here for decades, and their owners might be reluctant to relocate. But Meridian has experience with these situations. They know how to make the transition smooth for everyone involved. Mayor Henley had been in politics long enough to understand what smooth transitions often meant. Are we talking about using eminent domain? Only as a last resort, Paul assured her. Meridian prefers to work with property owners to reach mutually beneficial agreements. They've found that most people are willing to sell when they understand the broader benefits to the community. The mayor walked to her window and looked out at the downtown area. She had grown up in Millbrook, but in the newer suburban neighborhoods. The older downtown district had always seemed run down to her, filled with businesses that hadn't kept up with the times. The idea of replacing them with modern developments was appealing. Who are the key property owners we'd need to work with? She asked. Paul consulted his notes. There are about 15 critical properties. Most are small business owners who rent their spaces, so we'd primarily be dealing with the actual property owners. Meridian's research team has identified the major landowners in the area. What neither the mayor nor Paul realized was that Meridian's research had been incomplete. The development company had focused on properties with visible ownership, missing the complex web of holdings that the Washington family had built over 4 generations. 2 weeks later, Mayor Henley met with Derek Hamilton, Meridian's lead development coordinator, to discuss implementation strategies. Hamilton was a smooth-talking man in his early 40s who specialized in urban redevelopment projects across the region. The key to success in these projects is managing the transition carefully. Hamilton explained as they toured the downtown area in his expensive SUV. We've found that some business owners need additional encouragement to understand the benefits of relocating. What kind of encouragement? The mayor asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the details. Sometimes there are code compliance issues that haven't been properly enforced. Sometimes businesses are operating without all the necessary permits or inspections. When these issues are addressed properly, it often helps business owners realize that selling might be their best option. Mayor Henley felt uncomfortable with the implication, but the potential benefits of the development project were too attractive to ignore. I assume you work with local authorities to ensure everything is handled legally. Absolutely. We always follow proper procedures. In fact, we've found that local police departments are often very helpful in ensuring that all businesses are operating in full compliance with city codes. Hamilton pointed to various buildings as they drove through downtown. That corner location with the old grocery store, for example. That's a prime spot for retail development, but the current tenant has been there for decades. The property owner might need some motivation to consider our offer. The mayor looked at Washington Family Market without really seeing it. To her, it was just another outdated business taking up valuable space that could be generating much higher tax revenue over the following weeks. Mayor Henley worked with her staff to identify which city departments could assist with the redevelopment project. She met quietly with the head of the building inspection department, the fire marshal, and the police chief to discuss ensuring full compliance with city codes in the downtown area. Chief William Morrison had been running the Millbrook police department for 12 years and understood political pressure when he saw it. Are you asking us to target specific businesses, Victoria? Of course not, the mayor replied carefully. I'm simply asking that your department make sure all businesses in the downtown area are operating legally and safely. If there are violations that have been overlooked, they should be addressed. Chief Morrison knew this was a delicate situation. We can increase our routine inspections and code enforcement in that area, but if we find violations, we have to treat them seriously. That's all I'm asking for, Mayor Henley said. Just make sure the law is being enforced equally for everyone. What the mayor didn't mention was that she had already received a list from Meridian Development identifying which businesses were considered priority relocations. Washington Family Market was at the top of that list because of its prime corner location. Chief Morrison assigned the increased downtown enforcement duties to Officer Brandon Cole, partly because Cole had requested more opportunities for community policing, and partly because Cole's uncle, Richard, was a strong supporter of the mayor's redevelopment plans. Officer Cole approached his new assignment with enthusiasm that concerned some of his colleagues. He began conducting surprise inspections and responding to vague complaints with unusual aggression. Other officers noticed the change but assumed Cole was just trying to impress the chief. Meanwhile, Mayor Henley was meeting regularly with Meridian Development to track their progress in acquiring properties. Most of the business owners they approached were willing to listen to offers, though many were hesitant to sell. We're making good progress, Derek Hamilton reported during one of their monthly meetings. About 60% of the property owners are willing to negotiate. The others might need more encouragement to understand the benefits of our proposal. What about the Washington store? The mayor asked. She had driven past it several times and noticed how busy it always seemed to be. That's one of our more challenging situations, Hamilton admitted. The owner is an elderly man who's very attached to the business. He hasn't been responsive to our initial outreach, but we're developing strategies to help him see the advantages of selling. Mayor Henley nodded, assuming that Theodore Washington would eventually come around when he understood the financial benefits of selling. She had no idea that Theodore already knew about the redevelopment plans and was quietly preparing his own response. As the election approached, Mayor Henley became more invested in the success of the Meridian project. She began hinting to reporters and supporters that a major development announcement was coming that would transform Millbrook's economic future. We're going to bring Millbrook into the 21st century, she told a gathering of local business leaders. Sometimes progress requires difficult decisions, but the benefits to our entire community will be enormous. The mayor had convinced herself that forcing out a few old businesses was a small price to pay for the greater good of the city. She never questioned whether the current business owners might have rights that deserved protection or whether the community actually wanted the changes she was planning. When Officer Cole finally closed Washington Family Market, Mayor Henley saw it as the first successful step in clearing the way for development. She had no idea that she had just made the biggest mistake of her political career. The city council meeting on Thursday evening was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread throughout Millbrook that the Washington family would be addressing the council about their store closure, and supporters had arrived early to fill every available seat. Ashley Washington sat in the front row with her grandfather, both of them carrying briefcases that would soon change everything. Mayor Henley called the meeting to order, clearly annoyed by the large turnout. She had hoped this would be a routine session where she could quietly announce the preliminary steps for the downtown redevelopment project. Instead, she was facing a room full of angry residents demanding answers about the Washington store closure. Before we begin regular business, Mayor Henley said with forced politeness, we'll hear from Mr. Theodore Washington regarding recent issues with his business license. Theodore stood slowly, his dignified bearing commanding immediate attention from everyone in the room. At 73, he moved deliberately but with obvious strength and purpose. Ashley remained seated but opened her briefcase and began arranging documents on the table in front of her. Thank you, Mayor Henley. Theodore began, his voice clear and steady. "I appreciate the opportunity to address the council and the community about what happened to my family store this week." He paused and looked around the room, making eye contact with familiar faces from his neighborhood. The Washington family has been part of Millbrook for 136 years. We've seen this city grow and change through good times and difficult times. We've always tried to be good neighbors and contributing members of this community. Several people in the audience nodded in agreement, and there were murmurs of support throughout the room. On Tuesday morning, Officer Brandon Cole closed my store, claiming there were safety violations and problems with our permits. I want everyone to know that every document he requested was provided to him, and every permit we carry is current and valid. Theodore's voice carried no anger, just a calm certainty that made his words even more powerful. But this isn't really about permits or safety violations. This is about pressure being applied to force longtime business owners to sell their properties. Mayor Henley shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This wasn't the direction she had expected the conversation to take. "My granddaughter Ashley is an attorney, and she's been investigating what happened to my store. Ashley, would you please share what you've discovered?" Ashley stood and moved to the podium, carrying a folder thick with documents. "Thank you, Grandpa." She looked directly at Mayor Henley as she began to speak. "Over the past week, I've documented a pattern of harassment targeting minority-owned businesses in downtown Millbrook. Officer Cole has been the responding officer in 6 separate cases where established businesses were suddenly closed for alleged violations. In each case, the business owners were approached weeks earlier by representatives asking if they were interested in selling their properties." The room was completely silent now, with everyone focused on Ashley's words. "I've also discovered that Mayor Henley has been meeting regularly with Meridian Development Group about a downtown redevelopment project that would require the removal of most existing businesses. The timing of these enforcement actions is not a coincidence." Mayor Henley stood up abruptly. "Miss Washington, I don't know where you're getting this information, but I haven't done anything improper. Economic development is part of my job as mayor." Ashley remained calm and professional. "I'm not suggesting anything improper about economic development, Mayor Henley, but I'm questioning the methods being used to pressure business owners to sell." She turned to address the full council. "However, that's not why we're here tonight. We're here because my grandfather's store was illegally closed, and it's time for the city to understand exactly who they're dealing with." Theodore stood and joined his granddaughter at the podium. "Ashley, why don't you show them the documents?" Ashley opened her folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "I'd like to present to the City Council copies of property deeds showing the current ownership of various parcels throughout downtown Millbrook." She handed copies to each council member and to Mayor Henley. "The first document shows that the Washington family owns the land under the Millbrook Police Station. The second shows our ownership of the property where City Hall currently sits." The room erupted in surprised murmurs as people tried to process what they were hearing. Councilmember Robert Martinez looked up from the documents with obvious shock. "These deeds show the Washington family as the property owners?" "That's correct," Ashley replied. "The third document shows our ownership of the courthouse property. The fourth shows our ownership of the land under the public library." Mayor Henley was frantically flipping through the pages, her face growing paler with each deed she examined. "This can't be right. The city has lease agreements for these properties." "Yes, you do," Theodore said calmly. "The Washington family has been your landlord for decades. We've honored every lease agreement and accepted every payment on time. We've never interfered with city operations or made unreasonable demands." Ashley continued presenting documents. "In total, the Washington family owns 67% of the commercial properties in downtown Millbrook. This includes the land under most of the buildings that Meridian Development wants to acquire for their redevelopment project." The silence in the room was deafening. Council members were staring at the documents in disbelief, while Mayor Henley looked like she had seen a ghost. "How is this possible?" asked Councilmember Janet Foster. Why didn't we know about this? Theodore stepped forward to answer. Because my family has always preferred to keep our business private. We've used various legal entities and trust accounts to manage our properties, all completely legal and properly documented. We believe that quiet success was better than drawing attention to ourselves. Ashley added, every property acquisition, every lease agreement, and every transaction has been handled through legitimate legal channels. Our family has been paying property taxes on these holdings for generations. Mayor Henley finally found her voice. What do you want from us? Are you threatening to terminate the city's leases? We're not threatening anything, Theodore replied with dignity. We're simply informing the city council and the community about who we really are. For too long, people have assumed that the Washington family was just another small business that could be pushed around. Ashley returned to the podium. However, given the harassment my grandfather has faced, and the systematic targeting of minority businesses in this downtown area, we are considering our options regarding lease renewals. She pulled out another set of documents. Several of the city's leases are due for renewal over the next 2 years. The police station lease expires in 18 months. City Hall's lease expires in 2 years. The courthouse lease comes up for renewal in 14 months. The implications were slowly sinking in around the room. Without these lease renewals, the city would have to find new locations for essential services. Councilmember Martinez leaned forward. Mr. Washington, what would it take to ensure these leases are renewed? Theodore exchanged a look with his granddaughter before answering. We want the same thing we've always wanted, to be treated with respect and fairness. We want an end to the harassment of minority-owned businesses. And we want the city to understand that economic development doesn't have to come at the expense of families who have been part of this community for generations. Mayor Henley was clearly struggling to process the complete reversal of power that had just occurred. An hour ago, she thought she was dealing with a powerless elderly man whose store could be easily eliminated. Now, she was facing someone who literally owned the ground her office sat on. The Washington family has never used our property ownership to interfere with city operations, Ashley concluded. But we also won't stand by and watch while our family and our neighbors are harassed and intimidated. Theodore took the podium one final time. We came to America with nothing. We built our success through hard work, smart decisions, and patience. We've always believed that true power comes from community, not from forcing others out. Tonight, we're asking the city to remember those same values. As the meeting ended, people throughout the room were still processing what they had learned. The Washington family had just revealed that they were not victims, but rather the most powerful property owners in Millbrook. The game had completely changed, and everyone knew it. The morning after the city council meeting, Millbrook woke up to a completely different reality. The revelation about the Washington family's property holdings had spread throughout the community like wildfire, and everyone was trying to understand what it meant for the future of their city. Officer Brandon Cole arrived at the police station that Friday morning completely unaware of what had transpired the night before. He had spent the evening at home, confident that his closure of the Washington store was just another successful enforcement action. It wasn't until he walked into the station and saw the expression on Chief Morrison's face that he realized something had changed. "Cole, my office now," Chief Morrison said tersely, his voice carrying an authority that made every other officer in the room look up from their morning routines. Brandon followed the chief into his office, still confused about why everyone seemed to be staring at him. Chief Morrison closed the door and turned to face him with an expression that was equal parts anger and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Chief Morrison asked, holding up a copy of the morning newspaper. The headline read, "Local family owns most of downtown Millbrook, questions raised about police harassment." Brandon scanned the article quickly, his confusion growing with every paragraph. "I don't understand, Chief. I was just enforcing code." "Violations at that grocery store. What does this have to do with property ownership?" "Sit down, Cole." Chief Morrison's voice was deadly serious. "The Washington family owns this building. The land under this police station belongs to Theodore Washington, the man whose store you closed for no legitimate reason. The color drained from Brandon's face as the implications began to sink in. That's impossible. He's just an old man running a small grocery store. No, he's not. He's the landlord for half the city, including this police station. Chief Morrison sat down heavily behind his desk. And thanks to your harassment, he's now questioning whether he wants to renew our lease when it expires next year. Brandon felt his world tilting off its axis. But I was just following orders. I was told to increase enforcement in the downtown area. Whose orders? Chief Morrison demanded. Because I never told you to target specific businesses or harass law-abiding citizens. Brandon realized he was in serious trouble, but he wasn't going down alone. Mayor Henley asked you to increase code enforcement downtown. You assigned me to handle it. I was doing what I thought the city wanted. Chief Morrison studied his officer carefully. Even if that's true, Cole, proper enforcement doesn't involve closing legitimate businesses over paperwork that was readily available. Your conduct was unprofessional and possibly illegal. Meanwhile, across town at City Hall, Mayor Henley was facing her own crisis. Her phone had been ringing nonstop since 7 in the morning with calls from reporters, angry constituents, and nervous city employees who had just learned that their workplace could disappear at any moment. Her assistant knocked on her door. Mayor Henley, the city attorney is here to see you. He says it's urgent. Attorney David Richardson entered looking grim. Victoria, we need to talk about the Washington situation immediately. I've spent all night reviewing our lease agreements, and we're in a very precarious position. Mayor Henley had barely slept, trying to figure out how her careful redevelopment plans had turned into a complete disaster. How bad is it, David? It's bad. The Washington family has been model landlords for decades. All our leases are at fair market rates, all payments have been made on time, and they've never interfered with city operations. But almost all of our major facilities are on their property. David spread out a map of downtown Millbrook with the Washington properties highlighted in red. If they decide not to renew these leases, we'd have to relocate the police station, City Hall, the courthouse, the public library, and the fire department's main station. The cost would be astronomical, and finding suitable alternative locations would take years. Mayor Henley stared at the map in horror. Can we force them to renew the leases? Absolutely not. These are private property owners with full legal rights to decide whether to lease their land. And given the harassment they've faced, they would have grounds for any decision they make. At the Washington family home, Theodore and Ashley were fielding their own flood of phone calls. Local business owners wanted to thank them for standing up to the harassment. Community leaders were asking what they could do to help. Reporters from 3 neighboring cities were requesting interviews about the story that was spreading far beyond Millbrook. Grandpa, Derek Hamilton from Meridian Development is on line 3, Ashley said, holding the phone with her hand over the mouthpiece. He says it's urgent. Theodore smiled slightly. I bet it is. Put him through. Mr. Washington, this is Derek Hamilton. I think there may have been some misunderstandings about our development project. I'd like to meet with you to discuss how we can work together. Theodore's voice was polite but firm. Mr. Hamilton, there's been no misunderstanding. Your company has been using harassment and intimidation to try to force business owners to sell their properties. That's not how we do business in our family. I assure you, Mr. Washington, Meridian Development had no knowledge of any improper enforcement actions. We're simply interested in creating mutually beneficial development opportunities. I appreciate your call, Mr. Hamilton, but the Washington family is not interested in selling any of our downtown properties. We believe the current businesses serve the community very well. After hanging up, Theodore turned to Ashley with a satisfied expression. I imagine Mr. Hamilton is having some very uncomfortable conversations with his investors right now. Indeed, Derek Hamilton was frantically calling Mayor Henley to understand how their carefully planned development project had fallen apart overnight. The mayor could barely contain her own panic as she explained that the family they had been trying to pressure actually owned most of the land they wanted to develop. Back at the police station, Officer Cole was meeting with the union representative and trying to understand his legal exposure. The union rep, Stephen Walsh, had reviewed the case files and wasn't optimistic. "Brandon, you're facing potential civil rights violations, harassment charges, and possible criminal charges for abuse of authority," Stephen explained. "The Washington family has documentation of everything, and the pattern of targeting minority businesses is clear." "But I was just doing my job," Brandon protested. "I didn't know about any of this property ownership stuff." "That's not a defense," Stephen replied. "You're supposed to enforce the law fairly and professionally, regardless of who owns what property. From what I can see, you targeted this family without legitimate cause." The consequences were spreading throughout the city government. Council members who had supported the redevelopment project were now distancing themselves from Mayor Henley. City employees were worried about their jobs if the leases weren't renewed. Business owners throughout downtown were questioning whether they would be the next targets of discriminatory enforcement. Ashley Washington spent the afternoon meeting with other minority business owners who had faced harassment from Officer Cole. Together, they were building a comprehensive case that showed a clear pattern of discriminatory targeting. "We're not just fighting for my grandfather's store," Ashley explained to the group gathered in Linda Chun's restaurant. "We're fighting to make sure this never happens to anyone else in our community." Kevin Murphy, the auto repair shop owner, nodded in agreement. "If the Washington family can use their influence to protect all of us, then we need to work together to support them." As the day progressed, it became clear that the balance of power in Millbrook had shifted completely. The Washington family had spent over a century quietly building influence through property ownership and community relationships. Now, when they needed that influence most, they were discovering just how powerful they had become. Theodore looked out at the community that had rallied around his family and felt the pride of generations. His great-great-grandfather Isaiah would have been amazed to see how the strategy of patient land acquisition had ultimately protected not just the Washington family, but their entire neighborhood. The tables had indeed turned, and everyone involved was learning that real power doesn't always come from badges or political offices. Sometimes it comes from deep roots and careful planning. 6 months after the Washington Family Market was illegally closed, Millbrook had transformed into a very different city. The changes weren't the ones Mayor Henley had envisioned, but they were changes that brought justice, accountability, and renewed community spirit to downtown. Officer Brandon Cole's career in law enforcement had come to an abrupt end. The internal investigation led by Chief Morrison had uncovered a clear pattern of discriminatory targeting that violated both department policy and federal civil rights laws. Cole was terminated from the police force and faced multiple lawsuits from the business owners he had harassed. The evidence shows that Officer Cole systematically targeted minority-owned businesses without legitimate cause, Chief Morrison announced at a press conference. This behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of the Millbrook Police Department. Cole's termination had been swift and decisive once the full scope of his actions became clear. The union had refused to defend him. After discovering that he had been acting outside of proper procedures and had lied in several incident reports, he was now working at a security company in a neighboring county. His dreams of advancing in law enforcement permanently shattered. Mayor Henley's political career had suffered an even more dramatic collapse. The revelation that she had been secretly working with developers to force out longtime business owners had outraged voters across the political spectrum. When Election Day arrived, she lost by the largest margin in Millbrook's modern history. "The voters have spoken clearly," said newly elected Mayor Carmen Rodriguez during her victory speech. "They want leadership that represents all members of our community, not just wealthy developers." Carmen Rodriguez was a former school principal who had built her campaign around transparency, community engagement, and protecting small businesses. One of her first acts as mayor was to establish a business owners advocacy board to prevent future harassment of legitimate enterprises. The Meridian development project had been permanently shelved after Derek Hamilton discovered that the Washington family owned most of the land his company wanted to develop. Without the ability to acquire key properties, and facing negative publicity about their tactics, Meridian had quietly withdrawn from Millbrook and focused their efforts on other cities. We're always looking for communities that welcome responsible development, Hamilton had told reporters before leaving town. Millbrook has made it clear that they're satisfied with their current business district. The Washington Family Market had reopened 3 weeks after the city council meeting, and the grand reopening celebration had drawn hundreds of people from throughout Millbrook and neighboring communities. Theodore stood behind his familiar counter, greeting customers with the same warm smile he had offered for decades. "It feels good to be back," Theodore told the crowd gathered outside his store. "This business has been our family's life for generations, and this community has shown us that we truly belong here." Ashley had left her position at the downtown law firm to open her own practice specializing in small business advocacy and civil rights. Her first client had been her grandfather, but word of her success had spread quickly throughout the region. "I want to make sure that what happened to our family never happens to anyone else," Ashley explained to a reporter from the state newspaper who was covering the story. Small business owners deserve protection from harassment and discrimination. Ashley's new practice occupied a small office 2 blocks from her grandfather's store, and she had already helped a dozen business owners in neighboring cities fight similar cases of discriminatory enforcement. The Washington case had become a model for how communities could protect themselves from systematic harassment. The most significant long-term change in Millbrook was the establishment of the Community Business Protection Board, which Ashley had helped design and which the new mayor had enthusiastically endorsed. The board included representatives from minority business owners, community leaders, and civil rights advocates. This board will monitor all business enforcement actions to ensure they're conducted fairly and legally, explained Board Chair Linda Shun, whose Golden Dragon restaurant had become the unofficial headquarters for community organizing efforts. The board had the authority to investigate complaints about discriminatory enforcement and to recommend disciplinary action against city employees who violated proper procedures. It also provided free legal assistance to business owners facing questionable citations or closures. Theodore had used his newfound public profile to become an advocate for property rights and community development. He spoke at conferences throughout the state about how patient investment and community engagement could build lasting prosperity for all residents. "Our family's success came from understanding that individual prosperity and community health go hand in hand," Theodore told audiences of aspiring entrepreneurs and community leaders. "When you invest in your neighbor's success, you invest in your own future." The Washington family had decided to formalize their property management approach by creating the Millbrook Community Development Trust rather than simply collecting rent. They began offering below-market lease rates to minority-owned businesses and startup enterprises that served community needs. "We want to use our property ownership to lift up the entire community," Ashley explained to the Trust Board of Directors, which included several longtime business owners and community activists. The trust had already helped 3 new businesses open in downtown Millbrook, including a bookstore specializing in African American literature, a community health clinic, and a job training center for young adults. Each new business strengthened the economic foundation of the neighborhood while maintaining its character and values. Chief Morrison had implemented comprehensive reforms in the police department's approach to business enforcement. All officers now received mandatory training on proper procedures for code enforcement, and any business-related complaints had to be reviewed by a supervisor before action could be taken. "We serve this community, and that means treating all business owners with respect and professionalism," Chief Morrison told his officers during a department-wide training session. "Our job is to help people comply with the law, not to harass them out of business." The reforms have been welcomed by business owners throughout Millbrook who reported much more positive interactions with police officers. The department's community relations had improved dramatically, and several officers had received recognition for their helpful approach to resolving business-related issues. Diana Torres, the journalist who had uncovered the pattern of harassment, had won a State Press Association award for her investigative reporting on the Washington case. Her series of articles had exposed similar problems in 3 other cities, leading to reforms and investigations across the region. The Washington family's courage in standing up to this harassment has created positive changes far beyond Millbrook, Diana wrote in her award acceptance speech. Their story shows that justice is possible when communities work together. As Theodore Washington approached his 74th birthday, he reflected on the extraordinary year his family had experienced. The illegal closure of his store had been painful and infuriating, but it had also revealed the strength of his community and the power of his family's century-long investment strategy. "Your great-great-grandfather Isaiah would be proud," Theodore told Ashley as they walked through downtown Millbrook on a warm spring evening. "He taught our family that real wealth comes from being part of a community, not just accumulating property." Ashley looked around at the thriving business district where families of all backgrounds were shopping, eating, and enjoying each other's company. The Washington Family Market occupied its familiar corner, its hand-painted sign now a symbol of resilience and community strength. "What's next for us, Grandpa?" Ashley asked. Theodore smiled and pointed to a young black entrepreneur who was painting the windows of her new bakery 3 doors down from their store. "Next, we keep doing what the Washington family has always done. We help our neighbors succeed. We invest in our community's future, and we remember that patience and dignity are more powerful than hatred and greed." The Washington family had turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity for lasting positive change. Their quiet strength had protected not just their own business, but an entire community of families who deserved to be treated with respect and fairness. Officer Cole had learned too late that real power in a community doesn't come from a badge or the ability to intimidate people. It comes from building relationships, earning trust, and understanding that everyone's success contributes to the greater good. The story of the Washington Family Market had become a lesson for communities everywhere about the importance of standing together against discrimination and the power of patient, strategic action in building lasting change.